My name is Michelle Tindall, and I'm going to be your facilitator tonight. I am a professional learning facilitator for Activate Learning. And a little bit about my background is I was a high school teacher for about 26 years, and then I did K-12 math and science coordinator role. And then when I retired from that role, I started working for Activate Learning, and I've been in this role now for about 3 years. So I'm pleased to be with you tonight. As part of our webinar series, we talked about three-dimensional teaching and learning in June. In July, we talked about productive discussions, and today we're going to talk about cultivating a community of learners. All of these things are important as we start shifting instruction to being student-centered and having students figuring out phenomena and having students really doing some of the heavy lifting of learning and working together as they try and do so. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation for tonight. We are going to be pretty interactive today, so if you wouldn't mind engaging in the chat, and then also I have a Jamboard that we'll be working on as well. Just so that you have some ideas, we can cultivate our own community of learners tonight. So if you wouldn't mind being part of that part of our learning, that would be helpful as well. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen, and you can follow along. I will be dropping links into the chat and also engaging with our Jamboard and some other readings as well. So I hope you find this to be a helpful opportunity to take a look at cultivating your classroom community of learners. So with that, let's get started with that's right. Let me try this one. Okay, there we go. And we'll share. Perfect. And then here's our slideshow. So again, I am Michelle Tindall, a professional learning facilitator. If you want to jot down my email address there, I would welcome any feedback to tonight's presentation. I'd be happy to also do some chatting with you about how things are going in your classroom. So feel free to reach out if at any point you would like to do some follow-up on this presentation. So with that, we'll start to build our classroom community. And what I'd like you to do is to put in the chat your name and where you're from, so we can get an idea of where everyone's from. And then what grade levels or subjects do you teach? And if you're not teaching, if you tell us your role in education in the chat as well. So if you would take a moment to pop into the chat your name, where you're from, and your role in the district, whether it's a grade level or subject that you teach, or your role in the district that you work in. Okay, welcome, Tammy. Okay, a hub coordinator. Nice. Excuse me, Janice?
I'm afraid I cannot see where to put where the chat is in here.
Oh, on your phone?
Yeah.
I think if you swipe, you should be able to get to the chat that way.
Mode.
Okay, welcome, Chris. Welcome, George. Thank you for joining us tonight. So if you get a chance to scroll up in and through the chat, you'll be able to see where everyone's from. So we have a mix of folks who work in our K-12 classrooms, but then also folks who support regions and other educational entities. So it's really nice to kind of see who we have in our chat today. So welcome. And what I'd like you to do is to take a look at the two prompts that are on your screen right now and do a quick jot just on some paper, either digitally or on paper in front of you in your space, and take a look at why is it important for all students to participate in science class, And then what's your biggest challenge with respect to student participation? I'm going to start the timer and just take about a minute to jot it down in your own space. What are your thoughts on these? Why is it important for all students to participate in science class? And what's your biggest challenge with respect to student participation? Okay, time is up. I put into the chat, just put into the chat, a link to our Jamboard. So we're going to make use of Jamboard for tonight for a couple of different things. So if you wouldn't mind cruising over to that link that's in the chat, and you'll see a prompt on the very first slide when you open it up. Why is it important for students to participate in science class? So if you would, on the left-hand side, you'll see right underneath the pointer arrow, there's a button for a sticky note. So go ahead and click on the sticky notes and enter in a response. Why is it important for students to participate in science class? You could actually add in a couple different responses if you would. Okay. Okay, a way to formatively assess students. Nice. Okay, collective work gets all the best ideas on the table. Critical thinking and problem solving helps me to know if I'm reaching students. And that's the way scientists work. Isn't that the truth? Like the way scientists and all of our community work. So it's just the way that we get business done by, everybody participating, understanding that it's world. Participation in science class is crucial for all students because it helps develop essential skills and fosters a deeper understanding of the world around them. So when we think about all these reasons for students to participate in our science class, they really are giving them life skills. And it's the ones who are participating that are actually doing that learning. So it's nice to see that we have some great ideas for why our students are need to participate. And it creates a safe space and norms around being involved rather than being right. So we're going to, a number of these comments are leading into what we're going to be talking about tonight in terms of our building our classroom culture for learning. I like also that it's a way for me to formatively assess students. So when the students are all participating, we get a chance to get insights into their thinking in a way that we wouldn't otherwise. When we have students who are the 5 that raise their hand, and then the other, third of the students that you never hear from, when they're all participating, we get a chance to hear from them quite nicely. Okay, if you could go to the second frame over, so click on the next frame. What is your biggest challenge with respect to student participation? So if you wouldn't mind doing the same, add in a couple sticky notes here. What's your biggest challenge with respect to student participation? Engagement. Okay, perfect. Too afraid of being wrong. Isn't that a big one for our students, especially at our secondary level? Afraid of being wrong, lack of interest, right? Getting students to ask questions they don't want to disclose ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. Getting students to ask,
Yeah.
sorry, that's a duplicate there. Students being resistance to the shift. They're used to playing a game where they wait on the smart kids, right? They wait
Mm-hmm.
for us to give them the answers and to give them the information. If they wait us out, ultimately we'll tell them what they need to know. Great. So we have some challenges here, and my experience, it has been um, all of these things have been something that I've experienced in my classroom as well. Students are just not interested in it. They're challenged, they are afraid to participate. That social aspect of being in our classroom where they just don't want to be wrong. They don't want to disclose their thinking, even though it might be amazing thinking. They're afraid to throw it out there that they might be judged. So um, another one, they aren't sure what they're being asked to do, right? So it's an uncomfortable space for them. So we have a lot of challenges to getting our students to participate. So when we're looking at making the shift where our students are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting and the thinking and the figuring out, how do we get them to be in that role when they're very used to, come on in, sit, they get their information, they leave, they parrot back their information when they need to on an assessment, and that's how they've sort of learned a norm of school up to this point. In many cases, not in all, but in many cases, that's kind of what they've been used to. So now we're flipping the narrative on their role and on the teacher's role in the classroom. So it's a big shift. It's a big shift. So I'm going to cruise back into our presentation here for a bit and talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss tonight. So we're going to take a look at the introduction and the need for cultivating a community of learners. And then we're going to lean into how do you build this community culture and climate? And then what can you do to get started? And we have a number of folks who are in roles of supporting teachers as well. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to take something from tonight that you can use in whatever your role is starting tomorrow. So we have some nice ideas for you this evening to literally take and start making use of things. So why is classroom community important? We're going to dip our toe a little bit into our first two webinars. When we take a look at three-dimensional learning, we are really weaving together what the students need to know. So think about our content area expectations. But now we're also putting in the science and engineering practices. So these are those verbs of science. So our students are no longer sitting and getting information. They're going to be engaging in the verbs of science to ask questions and to design investigations and to analyze data and create models. They're going to be the doing in this instead of simply learning about it. And then using the cross-cutting concepts. So instead of just looking at the pieces in isolation, they're going to do things like cause and effect. They're going to look for patterns. They're going to be looking at matter and energy and systems. So it really is important that the students have opportunities to engage in all three of these dimensions in an interwoven way and not just in isolation. So as we start making this shift, the students are shifting from the learning about into a figuring out. And if you take a look at our two images here, and if you would pop into the chat, what are you noticing in these two images that are kind of speaking to the big shift that we're going to be doing? What do you notice in these the two sets of images? Yes, so teachers moving from sage on the stage to a facilitator role. The ones on the right are the shift to more student-centered, right? more student-led. Good. Sitting versus doing. Nice. So we're seeing this shift, and then also the pictures on the right. Everyone's working together. There's more than one eye on the investigation. There's really more doing, but there's also, you can see that we'd be leading into analyzing and working together as a group. So as we're trying to make this shift, we're really looking at the practices not just in isolation, but across content areas. Right. So if we look at the center, we'll see the red circle, red oval are the the standards for mathematical practice. And in science, the blue oval is our science and engineering practices, and then we have our English language arts practices. When you look at the intersection there, building a strong base of knowledge through content-rich texts, read, write, and speak grounded in evidence, construct viable arguments, and engage in argument from evidence. That's at the heart of all three of the disciplines. And when you look one layer out, like, it's all about the students doing and communicating their information. They're at the center of that learning, and they're putting together in all three areas. So we can lean into that from a science perspective, knowing that the students are doing similar things in mathematics and in ELA. And I like to use this because it's a nice talking point when we're talking curriculum at our building levels and across content areas. So we're making the shift. Our students are grappling with new ideas. They're communicating their current understanding. That's tough, right? Our students aren't in the space feeling comfortable saying, oh, I don't understand this. So we need to really be thinking about how do we make it comfortable for them to communicate their current understanding and to build upon the learning of each other. And then the teacher's role is different now. We're not just giving information, we're really facilitating discussions and guiding the student learning. So thinking about this shift, we need our students to be able to work together to accomplish all this, because in isolation, they're not going to go from where their current understanding is to really understanding the content on their own, right? We're going to be building together as a group. And in taking a look at our chat real quick, there's a comment there based on our last slide where for elementary, there's tons of ELA learning opportunities in science and social studies. And it's huge in the state where instructional minutes for science are few in elementary. So absolutely. So when you get a chance to sort of do that crosswalk into the ELA, into the mathematics practices, and you can kind of buy some time for science and social studies in other places, and then let that also bleed into science. So, you know, it's nice to highlight those literacy connections. So yes, absolutely. So thanks for adding those into the chat. It really is important to look at it, not in isolation, but really in where do we have opportunities for literacy connections across our content areas. So thanks and always use the chat if you want to communicate with kind of what we're talking about. It's a really nice tool for us to do, to use that tonight. So moving along, last webinar, we talked about productive talk. So when students are trying to make sense of things and share their understanding, we talked about the Talk Science Primer, and we also talked about the Talk Moves as a teacher tool for facilitating discussions. So for giving students an opportunity to deepen their understanding or to share their reasoning or to engage with the thinking of others, we shared this. And it's going to be very, very important that students have these sort of tools and teachers make use of them as well, so that the discussions become rich and productive in terms of moving the science thinking forward. So if you need to get some information about this, I will share a link for our resources for tonight, so you'll be able to take a look at those as well. So let's do a little bit of science here tonight as a group. We're going to dip into OpenSciEd, which is a program in which it's built around the NGSS, and it really puts students at the center of their learning. Activate Learning is a partner with OpenSciEd, so we do a lot of work in curating OpenSciEd materials and helping teachers bring OpenSciEd to the classroom in a meaningful way. So we're going to dip into this very first anchoring phenomena routine from OpenSciEd, just so that we can take a look at the shift that we're talking about and why it would be important to build a classroom community of learners. So if you would, take a look at this first question, and that question, actually the first slide. So in February 2021, we had over 11.8 million Texans lost access to electricity to heat and light their homes, store their food, and charge their devices. For many people, the power outages lasted for several days. Hundreds of people died as a result. So I'd like you to not turn and talk necessarily, but I'd like you to think about, have you heard about this? Were you or someone you know impacted? So please go ahead and put it into the chat. Have you heard about this? And were you or someone you know impacted by this? So go ahead, put it into the chat. Okay, we had someone whose brother and family were affected by the disaster. Another person not impacted, but remember hearing about it. Another heard about it. So we've heard about this. Some were impacted, some weren't impacted. In my world, I heard about it. Luckily, my folks that I know of from Texas were not in Texas at the time. But it was a very big deal for our folks who lived in Texas during that time. And it was very, very newsworthy at the time. And unusual, right? So taking a look at what happened, we needed to find out a little bit more about what happened in Texas. So let's move on. So I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to put in the chat a link to our Texas articles. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is to open up that Google Drive folder, and you can pick any one of the articles that you want. I think they're numbered there, actually. Yeah, so they're numbered Texas articles 1 through 6. Pick any one of them and just take about a minute or so to read through that article, and then put a little tidbit of a takeaway into our chat. Okay, so if you would, read one of those Texas articles. I'm going to give you about a minute on the clock and share something from that article that you would relate to. So can you relate to the story? How would it feel to lose power for several days? Has this ever happened to you or someone that you know? So take about a minute and read through one of the articles and then drop into the chat. What do you notice about the articles and can you relate to it? Go ahead and drop into the chat. What was one of your takeaways? Can you relate to the story? What were some of your ahas from the article that you read? Okay, so we have one from Article 4, happened in the winter. How did all the people die? Good. So we have a couple of different tidbits that we've related to here. Good. So go ahead and scroll up into the chat and take a look at what were some of the takeaways. Okay, Texans were not prepared for such a disaster from Article 1. We have a connection where snow days are the norm in Wisconsin, same here in Michigan. Okay, so taking a look at what we've done so far, we've each read an article. What students would do next would be to take the article and then summarize the article that they read with their jigsaw group. Okay, so think of having students each read and then they would share their takeaways with their jigsaw group. Okay, so again, as we're going through today, I want you to be thinking about what are the asks of our students in this student-centered way of learning that's different than other ways, different than a teacher-directed, and also where what we are asking the students would rely on a classroom community, okay? So with their jigsaw group, students would then share what they just learned and discuss it as a group. And they would discuss these 4 pieces as they're going through. Next up, students would take a look at some graphs. So taking a look at this graph, what do you notice and what do you wonder from this graph, from this illustration here? What do you notice and what do you wonder? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What do you notice and what do you wonder? Okay, and noticing that more lost power in the south, right? Wonder if the darker, closer to 100% areas are urban areas, right? We've got some great wonderings why the Gulf Coast area was affected more. What's the population density in those counties? So if it's 100% or nearing that 100% without power, is it a lot of people or not too many? So we've got some great wonderings going on here. So we're going to move on with the what you noticed and what you wondered. So as students would continue on, we would do some turn and talk. Why did this happen in some places and not others? We'd ask students, you know, how many of you have experienced a blackout or something similar? And then we would take it to a whole class discussion. What could we do to gather more stories about related phenomena? Then think of an exit ticket. We want students to take it outside of the classroom. So they would do some additional discussion with friends and family and to figure out if they had experienced a blackout. And then how do you think community gets power and how is this different or the same as in Texas? So moving through these pieces here, you can see, and we've had students talking in a number of different ways in a number of different groupings. So now students have an opportunity to come back together and share their stories of what they learned when they spoke to friends and family, and then how do you think the community gets power? So now they're coming back together and doing another discussion about their related phenomena. Then broadening that related phenomena, talking about as a whole class, was a storm responsible for the blackouts you and your family experienced? And what other phenomena could possibly cause a blackout? And then on your own, students would make a model of why some buildings in the community experienced a blackout while others did not. And then when they're done, we're going to use your model to answer the questions at the bottom of the handout. And then with the class, you're going to browse each other's models. Oof. If something's similar to what you included, record it in your notebook and place a check. And if something's different or you don't understand it, record it in your notebook and place a question mark near it. So we have now just taken a look at part of an anchoring phenomena routine for P1. What I'd like us to do is type into the chat, but not hit enter yet. Why would building a classroom community of learners be helpful in this lesson? What did you see? What evidence did you see in this lesson about what students are doing that would make it helpful if we had built our learning community together before we're engaging in this? Why would it be important to have a learning community? So type it into the chat. Don't hit enter just yet. Why would it be important? What did you see in this lesson that would make it important for having a learning community established in our classroom? Okay, so again, type it in, but don't hit enter just yet. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. Great. So we have lots of different reasons or pieces of evidence for why a learning community would be helpful for this lesson. Students can enlighten each other with their points of view and their ideas. There's a good amount of collaboration. Students are gathering information and they come back with a variety of information from other sources and stories. They need to have trust and comfort because they're sharing their ideas and what they've learned. And then students are asked to work in small groups. They're engaging with each other's ideas. They need to feel comfortable offering their own. And there's so many lots of reasons of why they need to have a learning community, which is so true. So then what do we do as our students are moving into this new role? Like, what were our students doing? Who's doing the heavy lifting during this? And what were the interactions between the students? Okay, so in this case, our students were doing the reading. They were doing the getting information. They were doing the heavy lifting during the lesson. The teacher was doing almost nothing during that time other than asking some good questions and posing the prompts. And then what were the interactions between the students? We mentioned into the chat, there's small group, there's partner talk, and there's whole group talk. So there was a lot of student learning going on during this lesson. And we noticed that communication was key. So as students are figuring out their key ideas in science, it's important for them to be able to communicate, to ask those questions and analyze data and create and explain their models, argue from evidence and communicate information. All those verbs that we talk about in the science and engineering practices are going to be important for them to engage in here. So elements of a classroom community. Let's get into the meat of our tonight. So think about relationships, think about opportunities for our students to engage, a sense of purpose, trust, and the physical environment. So when you have these pieces, then you have that sense of a community so that the students feel comfortable, as we mentioned in the chat. They can feel comfortable enlightening and working with each other, sharing their ideas, and collaborating with one another. So taking a look at this, cultivating the community of learning, we're going to look at promoting a growth mindset, developing community agreements, and providing opportunities for students to collaborate. We saw those opportunities to collaborate already in our lesson. Let's take a look at growth mindset and developing community agreements and building our community. Okay, so taking a look at students figuring out together, it can be very, very uncomfortable for our students, and they're not used to being in a space where they have to give answers where they might not know yet. So in a more teacher-directed way, they might have already had their notes and things that they've written down, and now the investigation is confirming what they have already sort of learned about in their notes. In this case, it's now we're asking students to be comfortable in a space where they don't know the answer yet. And that's sometimes a pretty uncomfortable piece for our secondary students. So taking a look at a video that we have here from Carol Dweck. So think about the power of believing that you can improve. Okay, so we're going to spend a couple minutes just looking at the beginning part of this video. And I'm going to actually have to change my share here for a second and share my sound. Okay, and then taking a look at the video. Here we go. So I'm gonna watch the first 3 to 4 minutes of it.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge, or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it. How are we raising our children? Are we raising them for now instead of yet? Are we raising kids who are obsessed with getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A? or the next test score? And are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award. So, what can we do? How can we build that bridge to yet? Here are some things we can do. First of all, we can praise wisely, not praising intelligence or talent. That has failed. Don't do that anymore, but praising the process that kids engage in. Their effort, their strategies, their focus, their perseverance, their improvement. This process praise creates kids who are hardy and resilient. There are other ways to reward yet. We recently teamed up with game scientists from the University of Washington to create a new online math game that rewarded yet. In this game, students were rewarded for effort, strategy, and progress. The usual math game rewards you for getting answers right now, but this game rewarded process. And we got more effort, more strategies, more engagement over longer periods of time, and more perseverance when they hit really, really hard problems. Just the words yet or not yet, we're finding, give kids greater confidence. Give them a path into the future that creates greater persistence.
Awesome. I'm going to stop it right there. I'll give you the link to our landing page for today so you can check out the rest of that if you'd like to. But that whole idea of yet, we're not there yet. We don't know. We can't figure it out. We may not know how to explain it yet is super, super powerful, especially as we're asking students to explain phenomena that they can't figure out yet. And we're putting investigations in front of them so that they can figure out and experience through common experiences places where they can get information to explain the phenomena, but they still don't know yet. So they have to put those pieces together. Get to the next slide here. Hold on. So taking a look at that, the power of yet, huge, but also how do we help our class work together to accomplish the goals of figuring out science and figuring out phenomena? It's through relationships and community agreement. So thinking about how do we get our students to talk with one another, especially our secondary students and our high school students? How do we get them to open up and share their vulnerabilities and what they understand and what they don't understand yet? So relationships are going to be a key piece as well. So taking a look at how do we get at that? So when we are building our community of learners, what do we do next? So in the chat, I'm putting an article by NSTA. And this is actually, you know what, I'm going to put the Edutopia article in. Sorry. Let me just pick up the other article real quick. Take a look at that Edutopia article for a second, and I'll give you a couple minutes to kind of read through that as a group, or individually, sorry, as a group. So take a couple minutes to kind of skim through that one, and then we'll talk a little bit about that building community. And that one should look like this, building a meaningful community. And as you're reading, if you want to drop any takeaways into the chat, please do. About a minute or so left. No, you might not have had a chance to digest the whole thing. What did you notice, or what were some of your takeaways from the article? You can go ahead and put that into the chat. Any ahas or any takeaways? Right, so it's purposeful and an ongoing process. Creating shared experiences and rituals, inclusivity, trust, community building. Engaging in low stakes and low work risk is key. At the beginning of the school year, come up with things that the students want to talk about to get them talking, right? And what are some of those things that you can do to help students make connections? One of the articles that are going to be linked on our landing page talks about having an autograph statement. So if we were to come up with an autograph statement, my autograph statement might be something like, I love to ride my bike, right? And I love to ride my bike for long distances, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles. So that might be my autograph statement, and everybody could have an autograph statement in the class, and then you reshuffle them and you have the students go on a scavenger hunt to find the owner of their autograph statement so that students learn a little bit about each other. Students have something to talk about that they enjoy talking about, that they could also make connections and learn about each other, because as you have students work together, they're going to be in different groups. They're not always going to be with their comfortable people to work with. So think of ways in which you can make those relationships with your students, in between your students. Okay. Another opportunity for starting the school year is going to be creating community agreements. As we are bringing groups together, we as adults know that we oftentimes have meeting norms, right? And so it's helpful for students to have community agreements that will help them work together as a group. And there's an article here. We're not going to take the time to read it because I do want to get into what can we do with community agreements. So there's the article that you can read when you get a chance. But I want to go back to our Jamboard. So taking a look at our Jamboard here, let me put that link into the chat for our community agreements. So when you pop into that Jamboard link that I just put into the chat, it'll put you into frame 3 of our Jamboard. And if we think of community agreements, these 4 community agreement topics comes from OpenSciEd and their community agreement document that they have students co-create in classes. So what I like to do is have my students co-create these for my classes so that we know as a group what our norms are for working together. But as I have students working on it, I will ask them to come up with their look-fors, right? So in the article, it talks about having them co-created, and I'm going to just like kind of skim through here because it does give a couple of interesting points here. That power of yet that we talked about, right? Super important. So as students are working through these community agreements, think about having them jot down, what does it look like if somebody walks into our classroom and we're showing each other respect? What does it look like if we're being equitable? Now that's one that students might not have a good handle on. What does it mean to be equitable? Help them understand what it means to be equitable, and then have them come up with their look-fors. Pushing our science thinking forward, these bottom two, the pink one and the blue one, how do we as a group push our science thinking forward? Like, what does it look like in our classroom if we're pushing our science thinking forward? And then what does it look like if we're committed to our community? In a teacher-directed classroom where the students are focusing on getting their grade, there's no need to be committed to the community. But if we're flipping it and making it more of a student-centered classroom where students are figuring out, now there's a lift that has to happen by everybody, not just the one. Okay, so now we have the power of we in addition to the yet. So at this point, what I'd like you to think about individually and add a sticky note, whichever color for the topic that you're adding a look for. What would be some look fors if somebody were to come into our classroom? What would they see if we're showing respect, if we're pushing our science thinking forward, if we are equitable, or if we're committed to the community? So you can go ahead and pick what color you want for the Post-it note that aligns with the different agreement topic that you'd like to add a look for. So please go ahead and add some look fors of what would it look like if someone came into our classroom and we're showing these 4 topics. Great, keep going. What would be some nice look fors that we could add to our community agreements? Okay, so if we're committed to the community, students come prepared. They encourage everyone to contribute. I'm going to actually put that one between equitable and committed to the community. Right? No one is dominating the conversation for being equitable. Great. Ideas are brainstormed early and all contributions are valued until later when we evaluate against evidence. Great. So we're pushing our science thinking forward, getting all the ideas out on the table. Providing additional help for our students. What else does it look like to be respectful in our classroom? Good, everyone can hear you. Nice. Wonderful. So, in terms of the equitable part, take a look at what we have here. We have no one is dominating the conversation, but students are also encouraging everyone to contribute. So students asking each other, what do you think? Having an opportunity to differentiate instruction, acknowledging and really leaning into providing additional help or alternative materials for students. So thinking about how we're letting students enter into the learning, right? In terms of each one of these, then if we have groups, for example, come up with their ideas, then you would come up with one set of community agreements that we could then use as in our class as our classroom norms. This isn't just an activity, folks, for the first week or so of school. It gives you an opportunity to come back to these community agreements whenever you notice something going on in the class that needs some tweaking or something that you want to kind of lean into. So thanks for all the ideas here. I want to show you what an example that we have from OpenSciEd. So think of these community agreements and how you could circle back to them and give students a chance to not just see these, but reflect. What are some of their of these community agreements that they do well? What might they need to work on or practice? And it's helpful for students to learn these skills, like we said at the very beginning, where students would be able to learn how to engage in these skills because it's so important outside of the classroom, just like it is inside the classroom. So consider co-creating them so everybody has the buy-in, and then also posting these and coming back to them as opportunities to reflect as they go through the school year. So how do you get started with this? We had in the chat that it takes some time, and investing in the time now makes your classroom community run so much better later on. So go slow to go fast early on in the year. Change the student groupings early and often. Oftentimes students sit where they want to sit with their friends, but if you are having students work with pairs and work with small groups and work as a whole group, change those groupings early and often, even if they're random during a class period and then students move back to their seats. Co-create your community agreements, and then help students develop a growth mindset as we're asking students to figure out and to live in a space where they don't know the answer yet. It'd be so much more helpful if they have that growth mindset and they have the motivation to then take and learn and figure out what they don't know. And then that's a great skill for them to take outside of our classroom into their everyday life and into their future endeavors, whether it be college or career. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me this evening, and hopefully you'll be able to make use of the community agreements or make use of the ideas of making use of this in your workspace. I'm going to drop a link into the chat for our agenda page, which has a lot of other resources and links that you can use. And you're welcome to make use of them at any point, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.